It's been over 3 years since the attack in Benghazi on the ambassador's residence where 4 Americans were killed. And that story has not been resolved to the satisfaction of many individuals. In fact, to the satisfaction of one of our special guests today. Hi, I'm Tom Trento. This is our special report on Benghazi entitled, "What Difference Does It Make?" Please welcome Clare Lopez. Clare, how are you today?
Hey, Tom. Doing well, thank you. Happy New Year.
And our audience, Happy New Year to you. Our audience knows that you spent a distinguished career with the Central Intelligence Agency. You guys are in focus on this issue today, and now you're the head of research and analysis, vice president at Center for Security Policy, one of the top think tanks in Washington, D.C. in the United States. We're going to have you on several segments, and what I'd like to do is establish the geopolitical context for the Benghazi attack. We're coming out of late 2010, we're into 2011, the Arab Spring, and for some reason, Libya was targeted to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi, which occurred in August. Tripoli fell August 2011. Gaddafi killed October 2011. What the heck are we doing killing someone who we think was helping us? What's the situation there?
Well, I think we have to look at the policy of the Obama administration, which was to replace or allow or help to be replaced regimes of secular Muslim rulers across North Africa. So that would have included Ben Ali in Tunisia, and Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, and Hosni Mubarak in Egypt. And in each one of those places, the United States either allowed or backed and supported the Muslim Brotherhood to rise up. It was not an Arab Spring, it was an Islamic uprising across North Africa, and to help them to overthrow these secular governments. Even as you say, that Muammar Gaddafi was our ally in the war against Al-Qaeda. He had Al-Qaeda in his jails.
As bad as he was, and sometimes in a rough and tumble world, you work with these bad guys to hold back the worst guys. That was the situation. Now, Tripoli's about 400 miles away from Benghazi. Benghazi has 600,000 people, second largest city. What in the world is the ambassador whose embassy was in Tripoli? Now he has a complex in Benghazi, and then there was an annex, it's called, for the CIA. Why was Ambassador Stevens in Benghazi, and what was the CIA doing there?
Well, let's remember that Benghazi was the heart of the Libyan revolution. That is where the revolution began in February of 2011. And it was the headquarters, the command and control center for the Muslim Brotherhood-led Al-Qaeda militias that actually fought that revolution against Gaddafi. And so as we go on through 2011, the United States explicitly, under Secretary of State at the time, Hillary Clinton, and the Obama administration, explicitly, through the backing of the United States government behind the Muslim Brotherhood uprising and the Al-Qaeda militias that were actually doing the fighting on the ground. And so because Benghazi was so critical to the revolution, when Gaddafi's forces were converging on it in 2011, and it looked like it could be in danger of falling to Gaddafi, that is when the Obama administration sprang into action, dreamed up the excuse that there was going to be some sort of genocide massacre of civilians, which there never was, and jumped into action to make sure that the revolution would not fail, that Benghazi would not fall. At the time, Christopher Stevens, a career Department of State diplomat, was named official envoy to the rebels. That means America's first envoy to Al-Qaeda. That was Chris Stevens. And his job was to make sure that the rebellion did not fail, that Benghazi did not fall. And so he used Benghazi as a base of operations for that effort, although, as you say, the embassy was in Tripoli. But he used a compound in a residential neighborhood of Benghazi for his sort of base of operations there. And as you say, the CIA had a base of operations at what they called the Annex, a short distance away from the ambassador's compound. And during 2011, what Chris Stevens did out of Benghazi was to work with the Al-Qaeda militias, led by known identified Al-Qaeda operatives, fighters, some of them, by the way, who had been back in both Iraq previously and in Afghanistan, fighting with Osama bin Laden. These were the people that Chris Stevens was working with. And part of that was to help facilitate the delivery of weapons to the rebels. Those weapons basically came from Qatar on ships mostly, maybe some flights, but mostly on ships, financed, at least in some cases, by the United Arab Emirates. Those weapons made their way through NATO-controlled airspace. Let's remember, from the end of March onward in 2011, all of Libya's, at least the Mediterranean coast airspace and sea space, was controlled by NATO, led by the United States. And so Chris Stevens coordinated those shipments to come in through the NATO blockade and to be delivered to the Al-Qaeda militias with which he was working.
All right, now you're talking about, it sounds like, a gun smuggling operation. The weapons were coming from where, going to whom?
The weapons were coming from Qatar. They were made in places like Eastern Europe. Various countries of Eastern Europe is where they were actually made, but they were shipped out of Qatar. Qatar was the logistics hub for this effort. So the weapons were shipped out of Qatar. The United Arab Emirates, as I said, financed at least some of those shipments, some of those weapons. We're talking about small arms here, primarily. These were AK-47s, the ammunition for them, RPGs, the grenades for them, and that sort of weaponry. That's what was on the ships.
Who are they going to? Where are they going?
They were going to the port of Benghazi. Let's remember that across the northern Libyan coastline of the Mediterranean there are a number of cities, and Benghazi is sort of in the eastern side of that. They were going to Benghazi. They were being unloaded at Benghazi. And Christopher Stevens and his people were on hand at the port, at the dock even, to watch the shipments of weapons being unloaded and distributed to his Al-Qaeda allies, the allies of the Department of State of the United States of America, led by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. So the weapons went to Al-Qaeda militia leaders like the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group. Abdul Hakim Belhaj was its leader, to groups that were under Al-Qaeda leadership, which was in a chain of command relationship to the Muslim Brotherhood political leadership that led this revolution.
What about Gaddafi's weapons? Were they being taken and sent anywhere? Was Syria involved in this in any way?
Well, as the chaos of the 2011 revolution unfolded across Libya, and as Gaddafi lost control of his territory, weapons caches, weapons depots, stockpiles that he had in various places around Libya were looted, and the weapons taken out of those by the Al-Qaeda militias and tribal groups that were fighting against him. So a very chaotic situation, and some of those weapons, many of those weapons, were taken out of his depots and distributed among the tribal and Al-Qaeda, other jihadist militias that were fighting this revolution. And some of those, unfortunately, a good number, 25,000 of those weapons were surface-to-air missiles, sometimes called man-pads.
Now, what is the
surface-to-air missiles that can bring down airplanes?
Yeah. Now the annex. Now, everyone, we have the geography here. We have Tripoli, 400 miles away. That's the embassy. Then we have the ambassador's compound. Then about a kilometer away from that was the CIA annex. What is the CIA doing there with a full team of analysts and operators?
Well, I don't know that they had any analysts there, but they certainly had operators, and they had contractors who were mostly former special forces fighters who were their security. And during this time, we're still talking about 2011, the lead in the Libyan revolution, the overthrow of Gaddafi, that lead belonged to the State Department. That was Hillary Clinton's operation. The overthrow of Gaddafi was Hillary Clinton's operation. The CIA annex was there. They were obviously monitoring what was going on, collecting information and reporting it, but they did not have, as I understand it, an active role per se in supporting the revolution against Gaddafi.
All right, what is your call to action or your warning for Americans at this point? And we're going to do several segments with you at this point, and we're in 2012 now. We're coming up to September 11th, 2012, when the attack occurred. With the context, the geopolitical context the way it is, what is your message to Americans? What was the Obama administration, Hillary Clinton, doing wrong?
Well, so after you noted, Tom, that Gaddafi was overthrown and he was killed in October 2011, his regime was ended. At this point, the leadership of the country went over to the Muslim Brotherhood-led Transitional National Council, TNC as they called it. Moving into 2012 then, the envoy to the rebels, that is America's first envoy to Al-Qaeda, Christopher Stevens, was formally named ambassador to Libya. And he is back and forth during this time to Benghazi, which descends, as much of Libya did, into increasing chaos during 2012. Many of the militias, the Al-Qaeda militias that had fought the revolution against Gaddafi, were basically running amok across the country. And it became a very dangerous time for Americans or Westerners, really, to be in Libya, and specifically in Benghazi. There were any number of Al-Qaeda militias, again, Libyan Islamic Fighting Group. Some of the militias that formerly had been separate and independent, like the 17 February Martyrs Brigade, coalesced into larger groups. And for instance, the 17 February Martyrs Brigade and others joined a bigger grouping that they called Ansar al-Sharia. So this group took shape in the early part of 2012, and it was a grouping of other smaller militias that came together. But that is the first time, 2012, that there was an Ansar al-Sharia organization in Libya, although groups by that name had existed previously in places like Tunisia and Egypt and Yemen. So,
right, so
chaotic time, but very dangerous time.
At this point, what's so bad about this? What's the problem with all of this?
Well, the problem is that even as the chaos is intensifying, in Benghazi particularly, across Libya more generally, the United States wants to make it look as though everything is fine. If their policy in overthrowing Gaddafi was the right one, as they would like to have believed, then the aftermath has to be all sunshine, lollipops, and unicorns, right? And so even as the situation is deteriorating, and Westerners are being attacked in Benghazi, the Red Cross got attacked and pulled out. The British ambassador, his convoy was attacked and he was almost killed, but
right,
survived. The British pulled out. Even the United States, our ambassador's compound was attacked during 2012, but we did not pull out. Not only did not pull out, but hundreds, literally hundreds of requests for enhanced security for that compound. Remember, I said it's a villa essentially located in a residential neighborhood of Benghazi. It has walls around it. It has a gate, but otherwise it's not really fortified or protected. Although the annex in a similar neighborhood close by was much more robustly protected, but the ambassador's compound was not. They asked over and over and over again for more security, and every one of those requests to the State Department was turned down. And the reason, as best we can figure it out, is because of the United States Obama administration's desire that things look normal in Libya, that everything is fine. So you can't have a machine gun emplacement surrounded by sandbags on the roof of the ambassador's residence there, the compound, because that might upset the neighbors. Well, who were the neighbors? As we know now, the very next door neighbors were Ansar al-Sharia. Ansar al-Sharia moved in next door and they knew it. But they couldn't do anything about it because it might upset the neighbors. So all requests for security turned down, even as the security situation deteriorates drastically during 2012.
And we're going to pick up in the next segment with Clare Lopez, the Vice President of Research and Analysis for the Center for Security Policy, on the fact that the attack, which occurred September 11, 2012, was a mere 2 months before the general election of 2012, where Mitt Romney was running against President Obama. The last thing President Obama needed 2 months before his re-election, the last thing Hillary Clinton needed was a devastating crisis in their wonderful new Arab Spring land where democracy is going to come to all these people. Stay tuned for the next segment with Clare. We're going to dive into the attack itself. Tom Trento for the United West. Be well.
إلى الحق سلطانه ودكوا معاقيل جند